Coup and counter-coup in Washington. The night of the long knives for the putschist generals. The purge of the coup artists, los golpistas. A lot of them are rolling. Heads are rolling because of the failed attempt to install the permanent austerity dictatorship with Bishop Romney. I know something about this. I wrote a book about it. It's called Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America. Just too weird. Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with polygamy, theocracy, and subversion. Don't forget about the subversion part. So we've got a bunch of not subordinate. They're essentially rebellious generals contemplating a coup. Coup and counter-coup is the story, and we're now living through the night of the long knives, and we'll attempt to assemble the entire picture for you. This is World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C., and right now it's Friday, November 16th. We're just getting reports of the testimony of Neocon Dave Petraeus, Peaches Petraeus as they call him, the general of the Neocons, the supporter of Bush, George W. Bush's favorite general, this barbaric holdover from the Bush Neocon administration has now finally been ousted with the help of a Matahari, as we will tell you, a Matahari of the intelligence community, I guess working for the other side. Certainly not a sociological phenomenon, but the result of pre-concert and deliberation, as we would have to say. So again, this is exactly why I wrote the book, to warn you about this. Polygamy, theocracy, and subversion. It's called Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America. When selecting the title, we discussed, could we put the Mormon coup? Well, it turns out that a lot of people don't know what coup means. And then we thought, could it be the Mormon putsch? Well, putsch also, people don't really know that one. We don't have enough of a developed culture in the English language for these things. But then takeover. Well, what was planned was a takeover. And that was the Benghazi event. Now, we've got all the howling reactionaries who have battened onto this issue. They're basically having a fit. They're having a psychotic episode, and they've decided to keep repeating Benghazi, 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 as if this is going to get them anywhere. If they find out the truth, it leads back to them. If Jason Chaffetz of the Issa Committee finds out the truth of Benghazi, which he may or may not know, he'll find that it leads right back to him and his faction, back to Bolton, back to Neocons. And don't forget that very sinister CIA Mormon mafia. So we want to talk about this in detail. We've got quite a list of heads that have rolled. And we've also got to think about the historical background, going back to the, above all, the Muttalab case of December 2009, Christmas Day 2009. Muttalab arrested after flying in from over the skies of Detroit. And that's the one where the Obama White House figured out, according to Richard Wolff, reported on my website and very few other places, that the Obama administration had figured out that there was a faction that wanted that plane to blow up over Detroit. They wanted it, and they didn't quite get it. The White House was aware then that there was a group that was trying to attack Obama using terrorism, but unfortunately, typically, Obama, the coward and the puppet, decided to punt. He decided to turn away. Even later on, when Undersecretary of State Patrick Kennedy told the investigating committee that the State Department wanted to remove the visa of Muttalab and prevent him from coming into the United States, we learned then that another agency, unnamed, said, no, let him keep his visa. We want him to fly in. We're going to follow him. And, of course, the problem is it would be nice to hear off the record from people who were in that meeting, what was the agency that said that Mutallab should keep his visa? But now let's look at all of this in the framework of the Israeli attack on Gaza. Now, what is working here? I would say, above all, the desperate demagogue Netanyahu is in big trouble right now, and not just in terms of votes and polls, but in terms of the Israeli elite, because the cardinal crime of Netanyahu is that he has absolutely bungled the relation between the Israeli client state and the big U.S. patron. He has managed to antagonize Obama to a fare-thee-well with his insolence, with his impudence, with his outrageous meddling in U.S. internal affairs. Netanyahu has generated a backlash, and it goes beyond Obama, because this is now something big enough so that lots of people are very angry about it. If you were watching Morning Joe when the news came in, you saw Joe Klein of Time magazine, I guess, very angry at Netanyahu. You don't do these things, Netanyahu. It upsets the apple cart for a lot of people. So Netanyahu is widely attacked in Israel as a bungler, a fool, somebody who doesn't know what he's doing. Intrigue, fine, but not bungling. And Netanyahu as a bungler, he's incompetent. He's a fool, and he has managed to damage the special relationship of the U.S. and the Israelis. So that registers in the elite, because they know they couldn't keep this act going for 5 minutes without the presence of the U.S. to preserve them, because otherwise, on their own, the kamikaze aspects of this stuff are simply overwhelming. So Netanyahu has done that. Now, in terms of getting votes, there's going to be an election in Israel on the 22nd of January. So we're 2 months from the election. It's like being around the first week of September in the U.S. vis-a-vis a presidential election. So we are in the thick of the machinations and intrigues around the Israeli political election of January 22nd. And this is the big thing with Netanyahu. What's Netanyahu's position? In terms of economics, it couldn't be more wretched. The Israeli economy is in ruins. We saw huge demonstrations. The biggest demonstrations in Israeli history were people coming out there saying, human life is impossible under this Netanyahu. And remember, he was the finance minister. He's the bearer of neoliberal crackpot economics, austerity economics, like child poverty way up, youth unemployment way up, despair, no future, and all the rest, right? Falling birth rate, all the terrible things that Netanyahu has brought them. There's the other question that he, even in his own warmonger terms, what has he produced? Where's your war, Bibi? He hasn't got any war. He's been in there for, 2.5 years. There is no war. The previous war, you'll remember the attack on Gaza in the interregnum between Bush the Younger and Obama in December of 2008 into January 2009. This was Olmert. This is not Netanyahu. So Netanyahu, for all of his babbling and bluster, has not even produced a war. So he hasn't satisfied economic needs, and the people who really want a war, he didn't give them that either. So he's in trouble. He's a desperate demagogue. That's one of the reasons this is happening. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. We're discussing coup and counter-coup in the United States and the mad flight forward of Netanyahu into the Gaza Strip. Now, they're related in other ways, too. It's not just that Netanyahu has antagonized Obama and the existing administration. It's also that Obama's entire neocon network that he has to count on, and his friends and allies and patrons are being decimated in the military. In other words, this group of subversive generals that we're going to go through, these are the people that Netanyahu was counting on. For example, if Netanyahu had prevailed finally on his friends over here, say with Romney, who would they have looked to under a Romney administration to start something? Maybe it would have been Rear Admiral Chuck Gowett. Chuck Gowett, the commander of the Stinus strike group in the Arabian Sea. That's the one that could strike against Iran, manufacture a Gulf of Tonkin, and so forth. Gowett was ousted in the last days of October. We might want to start calling this the Halloween massacre of 2012, with all of these subversive generals seeing their heads roll. But let's get back to the Middle East situation, wrap that up, and then we'll go on to the list. Netanyahu's November surprise is now this attack. He's doing it, I think, because it's a flight forward, because he has now suffered heavy losses in the ways that we've just described. And he chose to do this by assassinating Jabari of Hamas, the head of the military department of Hamas. Now, Jabari, the Israeli spokespeople are attempting to portray Jabari as an extremist and a jihadi and all this. How about the other possibility? Maybe Jabari was a realist. We noticed that Jabari was involved in the negotiations of the various ceasefires with the Israelis. Was Jabari a realist? The Israelis often assassinate somebody for the general effect, but also to eliminate that person. And the people that they like to eliminate are not the extremists, but rather the realists, the ones that they have reason to fear because they represent a rational and reasonable position capable of winning the sympathy of the world. So they go on Wednesday, they go and kill Jabari with a rocket, and you saw how shocking that was, right? In the middle of the traffic of the large city of Gaza, they simply blow up this car, people around get wounded, killed, and so forth. Lots of children killed now in these bombs. Right? The Israelis are doing hundreds and hundreds of sorties to bomb what they call underground rocket-firing sites. What do they have, silos? Is that what it is? Be interesting to know what that is. What we can say on the other side is Iron Dome is not working. We've been aware for some time of this three-layered Israeli system. Right at the top is Arrow. That's supposedly anti-ballistic missile defense. Then in the middle you've got David's Sling, and then you've got Iron Dome. And Iron Dome is to take care of these low-level rockets, right? The Grad or other kinds of tactical battlefield weapons with 20, 30-mile range. But it's obvious that something more is now in play. The big news of today is Tel Aviv hit by rockets. That was already yesterday, Thursday. But now Jerusalem hit by rockets. So all of Israel now pretty much under the gun. And the significance of this is the Israeli way of making war is now, I think, in terminal crisis. It may or may not be recognized there. We saw in the attack on Lebanon in 2006 that the Merkava tank, the armored divisions, this doesn't work anymore because of not even ultra-modern, but just reasonably modern anti-tank missiles. Those are largely neutralized. The other component, right, it's essentially blitzkrieg, right? It's tanks plus air cover, Panzer and Stuka. That's what it is. So tanks and air cover. The tanks are now in crisis because of the missiles, and now the air cover because of these missiles. Right? Some of these are not Grads anymore. These are what we've been hearing. Some of them may be Iranian Fajr missiles. Some of them may be other kinds of precision ballistic missiles with 50, 100, 200-mile ranges. Now, that ultimately means that every airfield in Israel is subject to being hit, in theory at least now. And what do you do about that? If your Iron Dome doesn't work so well, what do you do? Well, one obvious recourse, nuclear weapons. Is that what he wants to do? Is he headed for a nuclear strike against Gaza? Well, even if you do that, then where's the radioactive fallout going to come down? It's going to come down on your head. So there's the reductio ad absurdum. The whole war business is absurd, and the only thing to do is make peace. But, of course, Netanyahu's career is based on the idea that he won't make peace. So time to get rid of Netanyahu. The Israelis will have a chance to vote on January 22nd. But remember, this is his November surprise. This is his attempt to shape the outcome of that vote. And, of course, he's also very angry that his friend Bishop Romney didn't get elected. That is rankling him no end. Now, let's look into this. We've got this night of the general. We've got the coup and countercoup. We've got the night of the long knives. And the night of the long knives is the ouster of many, many top military. And I don't know if anybody's been able to put this together. Certainly the media are mum. Last Friday, after I had taped the program last Friday, we got the news that Petraeus was forced out, right? This is Neocon Dave Petraeus, Peaches Petraeus, the four-star general. He's heavily implicated in the debacle in Iraq, right? He was the guy who came up with the Kitsonian plan of create your own counter gangs. In other words, play the Shiites against the Sunnis and relieve pressure on the occupying force that way. That's what he did. That's Petraeus. And then in Afghanistan, well, you can see what a failure that is, right? The whole Afghan situation is collapsing. But Petraeus, along with his friend General Allen, these are warmongers. In other words, they wanted to prolong the agony of these futile wars as long as they could. And they were to that degree, they were happy when Obama escalated, but then when Obama wants to de-escalate to get himself reelected, Petraeus and Allen are not happy. And now both of their heads, Petraeus for sure and Allen, heads are rolling. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. The book is Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America. It's the handbook to what's happening now. It's not just about a presidential election. It's about an attempted takeover, and it's the one that is now coming to light, at least in the sense that it's momentarily stymied, but certainly this danger remains. They've only scratched the surface in rolling up the rogue network. Because that's what this is. We're seeing parts of the rogue network rolled up. Now, always think about history. You may remember that this is a little bit different situation, but General Fritsch in Germany back in the early 30s, right, when Hitler wanted to get rid of Fritsch, he had Himmler and Goering invent the story that Fritsch was a homosexual. See, in Germany they do it, and this also happened in the 80s. The general is accused of being a homosexual. In the United States, it's always the other way around. It's always heterosexual excess, and we see how the public falls for this, how the commentators, right, their prurient imaginations betray them every time. So let's take a look. Now, the first is Petraeus. Well, the head of the CIA, but he's also the focus of Bonapartist intent, Bonapartist forces in the U.S. government, people who want a takeover of the government by the military combined with the intelligence community. That is why Petraeus moved from the Pentagon to the CIA. He wanted to take over the CIA to essentially assert control. The words are all coming from other contexts. The Gleichschaltung, the coordination of everybody in there according to his will. The militarization of the CIA means drones for sure, and killing and paramilitaries and contractors, but it also means that instead of having analysts who can write what they want, it's all got to be dragooned. Now, Petraeus in his personal life comes across as a scoundrel, someone who was relentlessly promoting himself and always seeking to blame failure on others, right? This guy Hastings, who has done a biography of Petraeus, he always leaves the dead dog on somebody else's doorstep. He wants to scapegoat somebody else for his own failings, and he has plenty. He is a media myth, a media legend. And it's interesting, even the MSNBC crew, right? 5 years ago, they would have been against Petraeus. 5 years ago, when we had MoveOn.org put that ad in the paper, General Betray Us or General Betray U.S., all the leftists regarded Petraeus as Bush's man, right? Mr. Surge, Mr. Escalation, Mr. Warmonger. And now the effect of Obama has been to enervate and disorient these people to the point where Martin Bashir, one of the nastiest correspondents there on MSNBC, he had Hastings on and he said, boy, that's a really excessive characterization you've done of Petraeus. Yeah, what? We're supposed to support a neocon general. Now, I gave attention to Petraeus quite a bit over the months because it was clear he wanted to run for president, and not just he wanted, but the neocons wanted to run him for president. And his top neocon advisor was Max Boot, and Max Boot helped Petraeus in his relations with the Israelis and was, obviously the go-between of the entire neocon community. Remember, Petraeus was getting awards from the neocons. He was being lionized. That was in 2009, 2010. There was a theory that the Republicans are scurrilous, that you've got to have a figure like Eisenhower who can use the Republican Party but not be seen as a part of it. He doesn't want to slog through, every political primary or straw poll or whatever it is, but come in on a white horse at the critical moment when you haven't sullied yourself rolling in the mud with these other candidates. There was an entire theory of how Petraeus was going to take power. And not just as president. You'll remember that right before the choice of Paul Ryan, Drudge put out a blip that Obama feared that Petraeus was going to be named the vice presidential candidate of Romney. And it'd be interesting to see what went into that, because Petraeus certainly would have been a more intelligent choice than Ryan with his Ayn Rand book and his Widow's Peak and his genocidal plan against the elderly. And I'm sorry, the Republicans lost Florida. Don't tell me that people didn't realize that Ryan was coming after them. So all of this is Petraeus, the neocon general. Now, his activities have included, forays into politics. And you will remember, I guess it's last year, 2011, we had this very strange story that Iran was supposedly trying to assassinate the Saudi ambassador here in Washington, D.C., right? Adel Hussein, former foreign policy advisor to the Saudi royal family, now the Saudi ambassador to the United States. So there was, and this story came at an important moment in the various negotiations around the alleged Iranian, the Iranian nuclear program and the alleged Iranian nuclear weapons program. So it was a stunt, right? It was a provocation. And the reality of this was that the patsy involved in, the story, the guy who gave substance to this story, the patsy, was in fact from the MEK. He was from the Mujahideen-e-Khalq. He was an Iranian, all right, but he was working for the CIA-backed secret army, the MEK, based in Iraq, that the CIA deploys into Iran for purposes of assassinations, blowing up things in the Abadan refinery and the Karg Island tanker terminal and all the rest of that. So Petraeus, when he got to the CIA about a year and a half ago, 14 months ago, one of the first things he did was to accredit that fantastic story, that the MEK patsy really represented the Iranian government or some faction of the Revolutionary Guard Force or whatever other one that they wanted to cite. So he starts off his tenure at the CIA with a provocation designed to help Netanyahu and the warmonger party and so forth. So then we get to Benghazi. And I've gone through this before, so let's just do it quickly. I had all of this, right? People, go and look. I think by September 14th, September 15th, go to tarpley.net. CIA Mormon mafia attempts October surprise in order to carterize Obama. And this was an October surprise taking place in the month of September. But this was the idea, the September 11th event. Now, Petraeus, he's all over the story. First of all, what did the CIA do? Well, Coup. We know Coup. Coup, the alumnus of Guantanamo Bay terrorist training camp. They've disguised the terrorist training camp inside a concentration camp. Clever. So Coup has 4 or 5 years there. He's sent back. His first assignment, overthrow Gaddafi. He does it. He's the embodiment of the Benghazi, Derna, Tobruk terrorist corridor. I wrote about that too on tarpley.net. So he takes part in the ouster of Gaddafi, and then he goes on to do what we saw at Benghazi. It's the Ansar al-Sharia group of Coup that kill Ambassador Stevens and the 3 others. I guess two contractors, 1 ambassador, and 1 other employee, and they're contractors too. Somehow that gets lost in the shuffle. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Go back to September 15th, 2012. Interview by me with Press TV. CIA, Mormon Mafia, Neocons, and Netanyahu want to carterize Obama, and then a chance to write that up came the following day. This is actually an InfoWars interview. Romney campaign, CIA, Mormon Mafia, and John Bolton's Islamophobia network stir Middle East chaos to get October surprise against Obama. CIA's Gitmo-trained asset Coup is prime suspect in death of Ambassador Stevens. And as it goes on, then on the 17th of September, CIA, Mormon Mafia, Romney neocons using Islamophobic film to prop up Saudi and other monarchies. That's another reason this film is of some significant, substantial importance, right? We hear Limbaugh today trying to say, oh, nobody ever saw the film, right? None of the people who demonstrated in Islamabad or in Cairo or in Tripoli, Libya, right? Or in Europe, right? Oh, no, nothing with the film. The other thing was that the film was a way to relieve pressure on the Saudis because it allowed you to have demonstrations against the film and get people to blow off steam rather than against the Saudi monarchy, and on, right? There are quite a few items here, right? Certainly half a dozen items by me about this. So if you're watching, if you're reading tarpley.net, you know what's happening, and let me recommend it again compared to other Brand X websites that arrive with, interesting accounts maybe, but 4 weeks late, 6 weeks late, and then they've got detail in them that may seem to lend them authority, but a lot of the detail is actually extraneous, right? A lot of the detail is, it obscures rather than points up the main stuff. All right, so what did Petraeus do, right? He's part of this staged incident at Benghazi. It's staged against Obama. I'm hearing lunatics. Let's see who says it now. Oh, a certain Steve Petchnik says Obama did Benghazi. Obama did Benghazi. What? Cui bono, dear friend. What's the point with that? Obama is not going to do Benghazi. How does that help him? Or we had LaRouche saying Obama staged Benghazi to get World War III. Well, you got to explain that a little bit. This makes no sense. This is delirium, right? These are people who had tied their wagon to Romney, whether they're willing to admit it or not. So it's not just that Cuomo arrives. It's that there's the CIA team between 6 and 12 heavily armed, expert veterans, special forces, and contractors of the CIA, though. They're at the annex a mile away, and they are told to stand down. Now, who told them to stand down? Did Obama tell them to stand down? Again, it's ridiculous. You got to look for the CIA. Who takes ministerial responsibility for the CIA? Petraeus. For the State Department, who takes ministerial responsibility for the CIA? It's Hillary Clinton. And you've got to somehow account for them before you go through Obama, to get to Obama. And then the other thing is U.S. AFRICOM. We'll talk about them in a minute. There is this military entity around there, right? The Mediterranean is nearby. Italy is not that far. So there's the military. How about the head of U.S. AFRICOM? That's Carter Ham, and his head is now rolling too. So the assumption has to be that contrary to the delirium and lunacy of these Romneyacs, right, the ones they're for Romney, but they won't admit it, right? They really wanted Romney. They were so blinded by their hatred of Obama that they fell into the lap of Romney. They want to take it to Obama, but wait a minute, you've got to account for Petraeus, Hillary, and Carter Ham, and we can account for at least two of them today. Actually, we can say that one of them is already out of government and the other two are on their way out, and that's, on the whole, a good thing. So the other thing, of course, the February 17th Martyrs Brigade, they're a CIA asset. They are there. They were used by the CIA to assassinate General Yunus of the Libyan rebels, in order to make sure that General Hifter, freshly arrived from Langley and Northern Virginia, that he would be able to take over the Libyan military. So you could say to the CIA, wait a minute, your guy Hifter, what was he doing with his forces? Because he does have some forces, right? He's got at least some militias of his own that he could have thrown in. So CIA sends Asad Kumu to kill U.S. ambassador. CIA orders the stand down of the 12 paramilitaries nearby that could have made a significant difference, and CIA fails to mobilize February 17th Martyrs Brigade, the CIA asset. So all of this goes to Petraeus and nobody else, initially at least, until we can see more. So this is the price that he's paying. He's part of a cabal, a camarilla of generals. This is we can compare these people to the OAS. We're not comparing Obama to de Gaulle, believe me, but the OAS, right? The Organisation Armée Secrète, the camarilla, the quadrille of generals in Algiers, right, trying to do a coup against de Gaulle, right? There are, recent examples of attempted military coups. So that's Petraeus. Now we come to General Allen. And, of course, General Allen has been the head of the U.S. forces in Afghanistan. And what a wretched tenure he's had. Boy, talk about bungling, right? We've got Koran burning, urinating on dead enemy bodies. We've got it's a catalog of bungling and failure and everything else. And now he's going to be rewarded. Allen was on his way to become Sakur. He was going to become the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. The NATO Supreme Commander was going to be Allen, rewarding him for his bungling and his scandals that went on in Afghanistan. This is amazing stuff. It's clear that the military, were dictating to Obama, and they thought that they could run wild. Now, in the case of both Allen and Petraeus, we have these Mataharis, the charming ladies. Remember, Matahari's specialty was, of course, to to seduce generals and get secrets. And the two Mataharis that we can see are Paula Broadwell and Jill Kelly. Now let's take an excursus and talk about them. Paula Broadwell is obviously a top-level intelligence operative. She's on television saying, I have a top-secret clearance and then some. She knows Arabic. She's from the Joint Special Forces Command. She's a lieutenant colonel of military intelligence. She is an operative. And the fact that she is brought into the social sphere of Petraeus, or brings herself and then gets to work and then becomes the instrumentality of bringing him down, well, we'd have to assume that Paula Broadwell, this is my hypothesis, Paula Broadwell is indeed a Matahari, but she's a Matahari working for the other side. In other words, the people who don't want the neocon coup, who don't want endless war in Afghanistan, a return to Iraq, which is what Romney seemed to be talking about, and above all, don't want the attack on Iran. I guess that's the ultimate issue underneath this. So Madame Broadwell and her activities, it doesn't make any sense to go into the details of these things because a lot of the details are manufactured. But some of the biographical facts about Madame Broadwell are clear, and she is a top-level spook. So when the top-level spook then brings down the general, look at the people who are the who sent her. Then we have Jill Kelly and her charming twin sister. This is the Garrison Bell of the CENTCOM down there in Florida. We'll get to her in just a minute. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. Remember, if you want to know what's happening with the Night of the Long Knives against the putschists in the U.S. military, a partial roll-up of the rogue network we've been talking about since 9/11 in particular. You got to read Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney, and the Mormon Takeover of America. Yes, indeed. With polygamy, theocracy, and subversion. The subversion part, very prominent here. So the situation is that this Putsch faction is getting cut down, at least. Don't think that they don't exist, though. They're very deeply rooted. This is not the end of it. It's only the beginning. We were going through the list. We should probably, we have Madame Kelly, the second Matahari, right? Paula Broadwell, intelligence spook, top-level intelligence operative, intelligence officer, lieutenant colonel of intelligence. Jill Kelly, the Garrison Bell there of Tampa, whatever it is. She's actually the Qawam family of Lebanon. I wonder if they're linked to Saad Hariri in Lebanon, or maybe they're linked to somebody like Walid Fares. Who knows? Be very interesting. And you can see that they operated at a fairly high level, right? Paula Broadwell hobnobbing with Karl Rove, Jill Kelly hobnobbing with all sorts of people trying to trade on the fact that she was a friend of Petraeus. These two, I think, are simply Matahari sent in to lead these generals onto the flypaper, to compromise them, to create the atmosphere of sleaze where they could be Watergated out, not for what they do. I mean, not really for what they do, which is putschism, but for this for these associations, we might say. So, Madame Kelly, the social liaison. Well, if it's a liaison, it's a liaison dangereuse. She seemed to be an expert in liaisons, but she is these two between them. The net effect of them is that they have brought down Petraeus, and Allen is in big trouble. Allen, I think, will not become the head of NATO. Big surprise. If Allen becomes head of NATO, then watch out. And again, after his tenure in Afghanistan, with all of that defeat and his inability to prevent the infiltration of the so-called green on blue killers into the military establishment, it's a narrative of failure. The correct method for approaching him is called Limoges. Back in World War I, right? The way you'd get rid of a failed general, right? A defeated field marshal, is to send them to Limoges, right? To the military school there, or whatever it was, right? So they evolved the word Limoges. Limoges is to send a general into retirement or get rid of them, right? Give them an office with sharp pencils. So between the two Mataharis of Florida there, we've taken care of Petraeus and Allen, but let's keep going. We have Carter Ham, the commander of U.S. AFRICOM. Now, don't tell me he's being fired because he wanted to save the people in Benghazi. Why didn't he do it then? He's a commander. Give orders, for God's sake. No, because he didn't. He's part of the stand down, and the stand down does not come from Obama. This is so superficial. This is like the idiots who say, oh, Cheney did 9/11. Ridiculous. Cheney's long gone, and the crimes continue and even escalate, right? You're dealing with a rogue network. It's been there for more than 100 years. It's deeply rooted, and it doesn't depend on the politician you see. The politician you see is a stooge for the network you don't see. That's fundamental method. So Carter Ham is also ousted. So he's the guy who could have used military assets, which he unquestionably had, close by within a couple of hours, to do something about this if that had been his goal, right? If he had been a normal, aggressive, imperialist, colonial general, he could have done something. The interesting thing about Carter Ham is that his ouster was for some time a matter of confusion, even in Washington, right? There were actually exchanges between people at different news organizations. Has he been fired or not? And some would say, yes, he's been fired, and others would say not. In other words, it was not a very crisp event. Then, since we've mentioned Carter Ham, the current commander of U.S. AFRICOM, now sacked, we've got his predecessor, General Kip Ward, the previous commander of U.S. AFRICOM. I think Kip Ward is the founding commander of U.S. AFRICOM. He was there earlier. He actually served until about March, I think the first week of March of 2008. So William E. Ward. This would have been the guy, William E. Ward would have been the guy who did all of the planning and prep for the attack on Libya, which then, well, by the end of his tenure there, it was going, right, because it started in February, but in particular the bombing phase by NATO, led by the U.S., of course, in reality, although with the French pretending to be up front. This was something that started on March 19th, 2011. So how interesting. The current commander of U.S. AFRICOM ousted, and the previous commander, General Kip Ward of U.S. AFRICOM. And that, of course, means these are two figures who went very, very far down the road with the terrorists, with Al-Qaeda, with people like Coup, with people like Belhaj, Hasidi Hassadi. We know him. And others, right? Again, Tarpley.net, if you've been following it, you know pretty much who the main actors are. Then we've already mentioned, but we should mention again, Rear Admiral Chuck Gowett of the Stennis Strike Force. He's out there in the Arabian Sea, and on October 27th, he is then hauled home in disgrace, I guess. What was he doing? This is all of these people can be operative at any time. Right? They can all start a major war by doing something. But Gowett was in the very, very sensitive position of being right off the coast of Iran. So Chuck Gowett, another one. And we're told in the course of some of that coverage that a total of 20 Navy brass have been ousted this year over various issues. Now, that's a list we would like to go through quite a bit more. Speaking of Navy brass, Admiral Stavridis, the current head of NATO, right, where Allen was supposedly going. Admiral Stavridis, the NATO head, was officially warned by Secretary of the Navy Mabus, watch out with your spending. See, that's another way you can get somebody, right? The Al Capone, you can't get him any other way. You get him on his taxes. Normally it's a sex scandal, but if you can't do that, you can get these people on the lavish lifestyle and overdoing the expense account. So none other than the top commander of NATO, Admiral Stavridis, was officially cautioned, and I guess that's the end of his career after he went on some kind of a super luxurious wine tasting trip to the Provence, to southern France. Who else do we have? Well, actually, I should have mentioned General Kip Ward. What was his story? How did they get him? They got him precisely the same way, on finance. He has been stripped of 1 star in addition. This is a black general, right? He was obviously put there to help along the AFRICOM, right? This was a fairly obvious choice. He has been fined $82,000 for padding his expense account, for spending public funds on his lavish lifestyle. Look, these putschists are living high on the hog. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we're counting generals. I was once this is in Eastern Europe. A guy once said to me, well, we heard that there was an attempted coup, but it failed. And today we were counting generals to see who had survived and who not. So this is where we are now here. Well, this has been this way for a long time. It's good that it all comes out into the open. And we've talked about the role of the 2 Mata Haris, Paula Broadwell and Jill Kelly. They have at least helped us to get rid of these disgusting putschists, and also to portray the intimate moral degeneracy of a colonial army. As the Israelis have found, as the British found, as the French found, colonial armies that go and kill people who don't have the full modern means to defend themselves fall into the moral degeneracy of excessive pride. It's hubris in the negative sense, that they think that they can run roughshod over anything. We've already talked about the Mormons. The Mormons already have this, right? They are antinomians. They believe that the moral law does not apply to them because, after all, they're saints. So, who have we got so far? 4-star general and CIA boss David Petraeus out. 4-star general, current commander in Afghanistan and proposed commander for NATO, Allen, I think, on his way out. Admiral Stavridis, the current NATO commander, warned on financial hanky-panky and, I believe, on his way out. Rear Admiral Chuck Gowett, hauled back from the Stennis strike group. He's also, I think, on his way out. Some of these people may be on their way to courts-martial, but you won't read about it in the papers that much. Who else do we have? We've got General Sinclair. Let's see if we can find the case of General Sinclair. General Sinclair is an Army general, and let's see. We'll try to find the details about him in a minute. But he's essentially also out. Who else? We've got in the military-industrial complex, right, closely related to these people. We've got Kubashik, the incoming boss of Lockheed Martin, which is always one of the top 2 or 3 or at least 5 defense contractors. He is out with using the same stratagem, quite likely a Mata Hari operative, or just calling to people's attention that what he was doing all along. Right? Some of these people don't need to be entrapped because they entrapped themselves, but he's out. So that's a pretty big one, right? Lockheed Martin. Who else do we have? Navy Commander Joseph E. Darlak. This is the commander of a smaller vessel, right? I guess a destroyer or a light cruiser or something along these lines. And he is accused of having a drinking orgy during a port visit to the port of Vladivostok. Let's see. We're also the thing with Sinclair. Sorry about Sinclair. Sinclair, they get him on the sex angle. He was having an affair over a couple of years with a female military officer on his staff, and a pretty ugly scene because he had asked that this woman be transferred onto his staff, and then he began this affair with her, and then this has been shown. So we've got interviews here on the Fort Bragg report. Right, pick up your Fort Bragg report down there in North Carolina. Rebecca Sinclair, the wife of embattled Brigadier General Jeffrey A. Sinclair, has made her first public comments since the allegations against her husband arose. It's a sex scandal, and she talks about the stress. He violated our marriage and all this other stuff. So you see, we have like two columns. One are the ones who have fallen to sex scandals, some of them generated by Mataharis, some of them, I'm sure, quite spontaneous in the sense that that's how these people operate. And on the other side, we've got people like Admiral Stavridis and General Ward, who have been gotten on financial excess. So the two deadly sins of greed and lust playing a primary role. But the reality has absolutely nothing to do with these reasons that we're saying. It has to do with the fact that some of these generals, maybe most of them, and conceivably all of them, but this I don't know, are involved in a plot to oust Obama and bring in Romney. And they have therefore crossed the line into politics. It's a dangerous thing. It's good that these heads are rolling, but notice the cowardice of the Obama approach. Instead of coming out and saying, oh, Republicans, you want the truth about Benghazi? I'll give you the truth. The truth is that your general, your neocon, your Bushman, Petraeus, was the kingpin of a huge plot to stage this thing and perhaps other things, right? Other things coming up, because maybe Bibi had been negotiating with them to have some kind of a Gulf of Tonkin in the Arabian Gulf. That's why Gawet is so interesting. So that's the list that I have at this time. And again, there are 20 Navy officers mentioned in some of this coverage that I don't have. And again, it shows the degeneracy of a colonial army. Colonialism is moral rot. General MacArthur told the Congress, imperialism is over. The epoch of imperialism is over, and it is folly to try to resurrect it. Well, the folly is all we've ever seen. Now, the other question, of course, that arises is what factions are actually operative here? I would say, on the one hand, it's the one. Well, I've actually identified both of them. The one that I've talked about more lately is this thing I call the CIA Mormon mafia. It's obviously more than that. It's the forces that gathered around the Romney candidacy in order to try to get him into power using these probably very illegal means. That's the one side. We'll talk about the factions in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So on the one side, the putschists, the people whose heads are rolling at the moment, for the moment, this is the neocon, aggressive Mormon faction around Mitt Romney, or using him as a front man, not really around him. Above and behind Mitt Romney, we find this faction. Now, this goes back to Bush Cheney, right? These are your neocons. On the other side, it's the one I wrote about 4 years ago. It's the Brzezinski, Nye, the late Huntington, soft power. It's the other group. And the other group does not believe in direct military attack. They believe in leading from behind. Leading from behind means if you want to destroy a country, you don't invade it. You get one of your allies to deal with it, and then you can destroy one and weaken the other, or maybe you can even destroy both. So this is also very, very sinister. The Brzezinski, Nye group, they believe in economic sanctions. They're all for that. They're interested in other means, right? Not large conventional forces. They're perfectly happy with drones. They're happy with the divine plan coming out of the CIA. Remember, the divine plan was what should be done with Afghanistan? Should there be a large increase in conventional forces? Should there be a strategy of counterinsurgency against the Taliban? And the other side, right, Biden and this entire soft power group said, no, let's use the divine plan, which is bombing, drones, special forces, and very, very limited intervention. And they're now in the process of extending that to all of Africa in their own way, right, which is with drones. Not with boots on the ground so much, but with drones. And it's just generally, who's going to get these posts? There's a lot of personal rivalry, personal animosity involved, the quest for prestige and just the quest for preeminence or for primacy, as some of them would say, Brzezinski would say. So I see the Brzezinski faction, soft power faction, the ones who control Obama, above and behind Obama, duking it out with these neocons, and of course the Israelis are much closer to the neocons than to the other side, and that's now become fairly obvious. So now let's just look back. What are we talking about? This is the rogue network. In other words, these generals, we have to assume that some of them, Petraeus prominently, this is partly, in some degree, the rogue network. So we're going back to September 11th, 2001. That's the rogue network. We can also go back to the late Bush administration, not the early Bush administration, but the late. In spring of 2007, we know that Cheney wanted to attack Syria, but he was dissuaded. The Bush White House wouldn't go along with it because Bush had been weakened by the 2006 elections. Then there was the rogue B-52 affair of August, September 2007, right? The one that I predicted, the one that I told you about before it happened, right? Cheney determined to strike in U.S. this summer, and then the Kenny Bunkport warning, there's going to be a false flag soon, and within days, the rogue B-52 had taken off. So hard going for some of these other websites to compete with that, but there it is, the rogue B-52. Now, the interesting thing about the rogue B-52 was that it was not allowed to proceed. It was stopped. Who stopped it? Well, this other faction stopped it. The other faction also has a kind of a component of people who just want legality and traditions, and they don't want military coups, and they've had enough wars for the moment, and they have other priorities. But notice, in the wake of the rogue B-52, the Secretary of the Air Force was ousted, and the Air Force Chief of Staff was ousted. And there was a process of purging that went on. And this is in Obama, the Postmodern Coup, as well as in Barack H. Obama, the unauthorized biography. There was a process of purging in the Air Force that went on. After the Secretary of the Air Force and the Air Force Chief of Staff were ousted, there were other people who were ousted, and some of it was actually done. There was a commission that attracted no publicity. It was largely secret. Under James Rodney Schlesinger, a veteran former Secretary of Defense, was brought in to purge some of these people. So there was a process of purging in the Air Force that went on after the rogue B-52. The interesting thing is now, of the current group, the putschists that we're seeing today are more from the Army and the Navy than from the Air Force, if you notice, right? It may be that some of the enthusiastic putschists in the Air Force were eliminated back in the purge of 2007, 2008. We don't know that. That's just a wild guess. Then in August 2008, Cheney wanted to bomb Russia in Chechnya. I'm sorry, not Chechnya, but in Georgia. Sorry, Georgia. That was not allowed to happen, so somebody stopped it. And in the background, you can imagine Brzezinski, Schlesinger, and some of these others doing a purge of some of the upper ranks. The one that's most important for the current frame of reference is Mutalab, December 25th, 2009. Who let him keep his visa? How was he allowed in? How was he allowed to board the plane? And so forth. And remember, Richard Wolff came on Olbermann, when there was still Olbermann, on MSNBC in the first week of January 2010, saying the Obama White House is convinced that Mutalab was deliberately let in on the plane with the idea of having a large incident with many dead that would embarrass Obama and put Obama under a cloud, Carterize Obama. So the White House saw a conspiracy for a couple of days, and then that dropped out of sight. Later we hear from Undersecretary of State Patrick Kennedy that the State Department had wanted to remove the visa of Mutalab, but another agency insisted that he keep it. What's the other agency? Who was in that meeting? Come forward and tell the public what it was. Then we have the Saudi embassy plot of 2011 when Petraeus was just coming on the job. This turns out to be MEK. By the way, in the meantime, notice the MEK has been rewarded because they were taken off the terror list. They were going around buying all sorts of former government officials to get them to say the MEK is a humanitarian society for tea, sewing, and the garden club. No, I'm sorry, MEK is a terrorist group. And then we have Benghazi, or actually Benghazi, as we should say, and then finally, vote fraud. What happened to vote fraud? The Romney group was poised, with TAG having taken over the voting machines in quite a number of states, including Ohio. They were clearly poised to carry out some pretty heavy-duty vote fraud. And, of course, we were waiting. Where is it? What happened? Well, maybe this purge, maybe the night of the long knives, beginning before Halloween, disrupted the vote fraud capability, because that was undoubtedly a very important part of the mix. And I wrote at length about the permanent austerity dictatorship, and it's in Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney. So that, I think, describes the current situation. As far as Ambassador Stevens, he's been described as Lawrence of Cyrenaica. In other words, he's a controller. He's a controller for those al-Qaeda groups that were operating in the terror axis, Benghazi, Derna, Tobruk, and he then went native in the same way that Lawrence of Arabia did. So he's Stevens of Cyrenaica, and he joins Lawrence of Arabia in the annals of imperialist controllers that were sent in to use Arabs as paramilitary force against enemies of the empire. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So, we can sum up the night of the long knives against the butchers. Petraeus, Allen, Ham, Sinclair, Gowett, Kubasik, Darlak, Ward, Stavridis. These are some of the possible suspects on the list of putschists that have been brought down, well, partially with the help of the two Mataharis that operated there at the Central Command, which seems to have become a nest of putschism. You may remember in Obama, the Postmodern Coup, I posed the question, and actually in Barack H. Obama, the Unauthorized Biography, how is Obama going to get the loyalty of the officer corps, which is full of racists, Confederates, and others, as we've seen. Is he going to do it with money? Well, he has done it with money to some extent, right? There are now some cuts, 8% in the last budget, but the one that we're under now. And of course, there were budgets. This Republican line is crazy, right? If you don't pass a budget, you can't spend. So believe me, there's been a budget every year. The Republicans are nuts, as usual. So that's the situation in that regard. Now let's talk about a couple of other important items, but quick. The Syrian puppet council has been created. The rebels keep on losing, and we're obviously very, very interested in Jordan. We hope to have some more next week about Jordan. The Arab Spring finally comes to Jordan. This is now fuel price subsidies, right? All of these places influenced by Nasser have had food price and fuel price subsidies for many, many years, and Jordan is attempting to remove them. And this is typical of what we want. We don't want Jordan to be a base for attacks on Syria. We want Jordan to be concerned with its own internal affairs, or better yet, tied up at home so that they can't spend their time attacking somebody else. Now, there was a big anti-austerity strike day in Europe. In Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece, we're in full solidarity with this. These countries have, Spain and Greece have 50% youth unemployment, 11.1% official Eurozone employment. Eurozone about to go into official recession. Of course, it's been in real depression ever since 2008. The only way to deal with that is the debt moratorium. In other words, you got to take those Euro zombies, the Deutsche Bank and the rest of them, Societe Generale, and wind them up, resolve them. The Euro zombies are getting hit harder this week. We may be going towards another round of financial instability now that the election is over. But in the middle, interesting idea, debt is not sacrosanct. Now, this is a scam, but remember, it has some effect. The IMF is telling the European Central Bank to forgive, to cancel some of the Greek loans. So a debt moratorium is now on the agenda to some extent. We've got Calamity Schlaze, formerly the resident Roosevelt hater at the Council on Foreign Relations. She now works for the Bush 4% solution, who wants to compare the Obama second term with the Roosevelt second term, right, from 1937 on. And she says, we have to make sure that Obama doesn't do all these bad things. Look, in 1937, you had a capital strike. You had a deliberate policy of national sabotage by the super-rich ruling class, who in those days were pro-fascist and pro-Nazi. And their class consciousness had been stirred by the Spanish Civil War, where they were supporting the fascist Franco, by the Italians with Mussolini, fascism in Ethiopia. And this capital strike is what caused this so-called second dip, the New Deal depression, or the depression in the depression. This was pointed out by Harold Ickes, Secretary of the Interior, and by Justice Jackson, later the Nuremberg prosecutor, but somebody who knew the ruling class of the United States quite well. He said, look, you are on a capital strike, and the way you deal with that calamity is not by making concessions to the Wall Street fat cats. It's to spur them on. For example, one of the things we need to have discussed, we're told that there's $3 trillion in the accounts of the U.S. corporations, which they're refusing to invest, national saboteurs, because they don't have certainty. Roosevelt, in one of his fireside chats, mocks people who say, they want confidence. Do they? Confidence? That means more and more concessions to them to give them confidence. How about an undistributed profit tax? Tax on undistributed profits. There was one in the New Deal, and it basically says if you're a corporation and you hoard cash instead of investing it, that will be taxed. That's a good one to encourage them, right? To show them the error of their ways and to move them on. Then, concerning the restoration of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, Governor Cuomo calls for $30 billion in federal disaster aid. First of all, it's not enough, and even the subsidized rates of interest on the federal disaster aid are way too high. We demand that Christie, Cuomo, the governor of Connecticut, Bloomberg, and all the rest of them go to Bernanke and say, guess what, Ben? We want you to take part in rebuilding New York City, the financial capital, and all the dormitory suburbs where all our wonderful financiers live. You are going to cough up trillions of dollars of 0% century bonds. We're going to have century bonds issued by New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, New York City, Port Authority, you name it, Tappan Zee Bridge, Tunnel under the Hudson, 0% federal credit. Why do we have to go through this idiotic routine of begging the Tea Party fascists in the House for disaster aid rather than giving them concessions? Get the Fed to do it. And given the lawless stature of the Fed, you might as well call them up. And we're launching, the United Front Against Austerity is launching attempts to contact mayors, governors, and other officials in the stricken area. Start setting up the demand for 0% federal credit with long maturities, 50 to 100 years. Now, the other thing we've had, the night of the living dead. The secessionists are coming back. The crackpots, the lost cause, right, from the regurgitation of racism, just as Ron Paul departs the scene. Ron Paul's swan song was held this past week. And as one unfortunate television network said, his legacy will go on. Yeah, right. His legacy will go on in the form of his racist newsletters and his budget, Restore America, with genocidal austerity cuts of $1 trillion against the American people, including a 62% cut in food stamps. Right now, the ag bill is before the Congress. The Democrats want $4 to $5 billion of cuts, and the Republicans want something like $20 to $25 billion of cuts in food stamps. And the answer to that is no. That's genocide. That's a Nuremberg crime. That's a hanging offense. Because you're talking about people who have no job, no unemployment, no health care. There's no welfare left. People talk about welfare. There is no welfare. Clinton destroyed it. Do you remember? They're talking about food stamps, I think, if they're talking about anything in the real world. But no, we're going to increase the funding on food stamps. But now the secessionists, 25,000 crackpots come out of their holes and get on a White House petition that they want the secession of Texas. Well, there's a very simple answer to this. The word is Appomattox. Appomattox, buried once and for all this insanity. And dear secessionists, dear Secesh, look back at what that meant. The burning of Atlanta, the burning of Richmond, the burning of various places in South Carolina. Do you really want this again? Is this what you want? Remember, as General Sherman said, secession is the essence of anarchy. And if you do that, you won't have any property, you won't have anything. The old Brigham Young trick. I love the Constitution, and therefore I'm a secessionist. It's absolute schizophrenia and absolutely nuts. So go back to the insane asylum, oh secessionists, and go back and cultivate your mythological view of history. Patriotism. As George Washington said, the first demand is an indivisible union. Back next week on World Crisis Radio.